there, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 89 with Sharon Butler. So this is another bonus episode, keeping with our pretty strong streak here of weekly episodes, which will continue into the end of June. So really appreciate Sharon and her team reaching out to coordinate this episode to talk about a timely topic about supporting international students. So definitely was very enlightening for me, an area that I don't have a lot of exposure to. So I'm glad we could give some space to it here on the podcast. But also, just as I was listening back, just because I'm kind of self-conscious about it, I think everything sounds good in this episode. My audio is a little off, but still kind of adjusting to having a newborn and still recording some of these episodes and kind of fine-tuning my setup and everything. So I certainly appreciate your patience. My audio does get a little bit wonky at times, but again, it's a super great episode. Sharon's audio sounds good and everything, so I didn't want to, delay this or do anything like that. But as always, just appreciate you so much for listening, and super excited for you to check out this episode, number 89, with Sharon Butler. Yeah, we will go ahead and get started. We'll start off as we always do. If you want to give a brief intro of yourself, Sharon, and kind of the Cliff Notes version of your professional journey and how you got to be where you are today.
So I am Sharon Butler, obviously. I am the Executive Vice President of Education at Flywire. And my journey, just to kind of give you the footnotes, is that I've always really been either in a client-facing or leading client-facing sales and relationship management teams. Earlier in my career, earlier in my career, been with big organizations. I was in pharma, and then I went into communications, so big type of companies. And then at some point in my career, I thought, and it was just when I was having my first child, I feel like it was time for me to kind of take a deep breath and say, what do I want to do? And I decided that I wanted to kind of just start to look around and say, I really like this leadership client-facing stuff, but the communications business, it was really becoming sort of a commodity, and it was just a lot of things that you had to manage people, different verticals. And then in my search, I came across higher education, and I thought to myself, well, this is interesting. And long story short, I started to work with a company called Tuition Management Systems, and having that ability to stay very focused to a vertical would just seem super refreshing to me. So I realized very quickly that I love higher ed, and I started working there. And basically, as a regional director and traveling about, talking to lots of universities and colleges in the Northeast, really trying to consult with them and help them with their tuition receivables, figuring out ways to help them do more with less. And that whole consulting piece, it was just super rewarding because I felt like I could actually focus and understand the nuances of their business and easily collaborate and solution and figure some things out. So as I was doing that, I got contacted by a gentleman named Iker Marcade. He was a student at MIT Sloan School of Business. He was an international student, and he was wanted to talk to me because he had heard that I had a really good reputation in the education business. And MIT had recommended that I speak to him because he was looking for someone that understood this side of the business of higher education, sort of navigating the business offices and financial services pieces of it. So I met with him. It's such a crazy thing when I think about it now. And he told me about his really bad payment experience. So at this point, I am working for this company. I am actually going in and consulting and talking about these universities outsourcing their tuition receivables so that we could help kind of take that workload off them and give their students a better payment experience, right? And in that process, the international student population was growing relatively quickly, and yet we weren't solutioning for them as a payer or a consumer. It wasn't even something I was thinking about, quite honestly, when I looked back at that. So when Iker called me And as an international student, he told me that he wired $50,000 to MIT for his tuition, and he said it went missing. He used to say it got lost in the ocean, and it was quite shocking to me. So I was intrigued, and I met with him, and we talked about the fact that he took me through his process of paying. MIT had given him some banking wire information, and he sent the money, and it just went missing because of the way the systems were. Well, I listened, and I went off, and I started talking to my existing clients, asking and consulting a little bit more about this student profile, an international student, when it comes for them to pay, what are their options? And I just realized it was so disconnected, and there was no, automation to it. It was a bad experience for the families. It was really a lot of work for the schools. And I could see crystal clear that there was a problem there. So I left tuition management systems and went to start Flywire with Iker. And we started with some seed money from some of the fintech, like Boston Seed in Boston, and we just decided to, like, I would take the school side of the business. He still is brilliant. He would focus on like the consumer experience and how we could improve that process, and then we just started this whole thing together. So that's in a nutshell how I ended up at Flywire, how I ended up starting this company, and then today we are leading provider of cross-border payments. We're based. I'm based here in the U.S., but I lead teams in offices, over 12 offices around the world. So it's amazing, like in the last 10 years, how quickly we've grown.
Very cool. Yeah, and really interesting. I mean, certainly an area where I have a little bit of kind of ignorance. So I'm really excited to kind of explore it a little bit more. So I guess then, like, how would you kind of gave like the context of how Flywire came to be, which I really appreciate. So like, how would you kind of summarize like what exactly Flywire does, and then, like the type of higher ed clients you have, and then I guess to kind of just like sandwich it all together, like, in terms of that service that Flywire provides, like, what do you enjoy most about this work? Like, it's been a kind of a world that you've been a part of for quite some time. So like, what is it like in general, or, perhaps more specifically at Flywire, that you enjoy most about doing this type of work?
Yeah, it's interesting when I talk about my who Sharon Butler is and my journey. Good 10 years of this now has been starting this company and growing it. So it blends into really my bio, because the bulk of my experience has really been building something from nothing. And I think that's been the biggest challenge, and also the greatest experience of my life, really, honestly. So what does Flywire do now? So we started off where we focused, looking at this bad payment experience from Iker, and we figured out a way to provide an excellent payment experience for international payers, giving them that ability to pay in their home country just like they were buying anything else, and helping on the school side give them an automated process of a way to reconcile all their payments. So taking workload off them and now providing a great payment experience for the students. And where we've evolved as a company is we're considered a high growth vertical payments company, and we work with organizations worldwide. And we like to say that we deliver on our clients, their customers' most important moments, right? So in education, it's the client's most important moments is the student's experience to want to go study in education. We've now opened up our journey into healthcare, and we're also doing some travel now too. So we're vertically focused. The majority of our business is in education, and we've expanded over the years. So in education specifically, we help the institutions really reduce the complexity and all the stress involved in receiving and reconciling education payments from students worldwide. You might not think that there's a lot of stress in that, but there really can be. And to date, we have over 2,000 education clients, and we're serving over 1.6 million students. So essentially, what we have is we've built this global collection network, right? That's at the heart of what Flywire does. And that is, wherever you are in the world, when it comes time to pay, We want to provide the easiest, most identifiable, localized language, the whole 9 yards there, to that family to reduce the friction of making a payment. So that's what that global collection network does. We also support it with a multilingual customer service. So that all exists. And then on top of that, the way we go to market is we're not just a payments company. We're vertically specific in the fact that we've built a software layer that sits on top of that global collection network that allows us to solution for that succinct vertical. So for me, leading this global education team, I think the best thing about Flywire is that when we go in to talk to universities, we can listen to the challenges that they have, and they're mostly sort of operational. They're mostly, some old manual process or some old bloated technology that they've had to use. As it relates to, let me just be clear on that tuition management receivable functionality that happens. And then we can use our technology and help improve their operations while also giving a better experience to the families and students that they serve. So that's essentially what we do. And we've evolved over the last few years. We've done such a good job of serving the international student population and giving them transparency, saving them money, supporting them along the way, that many of our institutions have said, hey, can you do everything? Can you help, our domestic students too? Now, typically there's already been technology there. I used to work for a company that did that, but it was just clear that why blur the lines? Like over the years, last 10 years, like we came to market to solve this gap of a problem, which was, hey, there's an international student and family that wants to pay, and nobody's really thinking. We spend millions of dollars recruiting them, and then when it's time to pay, we make it virtually impossible and very unpleasant, right? So we solved all that hard stuff, and now we've gotten to a point where, hey, why silo this? Why don't we just offer a great frictionless payment experience to all students? And that's really kind of where we journeyed. And I think the thing you said is, I think the question was like, what do you love about this? I absolutely positively, well, number one, I love higher education. I feel like it's one of the neatest environments where there's not a lot of competition, right? I mean, essentially they're competing, I suppose, for students, but when it comes to the actual people in the organizations, they're super collaborative with each other and helpful. And so when I do my Flywire advisory boards or I talk to one university or another, they're all looking to solve a lot of the same problems. And so we go in and we really listen, and we leverage, our ability to innovate to help them. And that's the thing I love the most.
Yeah, and I hear that often from folks, certainly, because oftentimes like they've come up through maybe higher ed, and that's something that they've enjoyed about that. And still, when they start to work with colleges at a larger scale, like it's still just that collegial, collaborative atmosphere is always very much appreciated versus like other environments that may be more cold or cutthroat or something like that. But so yeah, I mean, and just that idea too of like, I mean, in so many ways, I mean, it's been, and it kind of mirrors, I think, something that people kind of accept more readily of like, cities and governments and that sort of thing. Like they're going to contract out to do a lot of work, and the colleges are kind of like little cities. And, in so many ways, there's, these different tools and platforms and organizations that work to augment the work that, colleges do every day. And like you said, I mean, that's exactly where my head was going, was like, the idea of like this, tuition payment platform and, how that integrates with the institution, but also like, how's like an international student pay, who a lot of institutions, are readily trying to recruit those students. They're like, okay, I've committed, I'm so excited to start at institution, X, whatever. And they're about to try to make the payment, which they're willing to give, they've kind of planned all for that. And yeah, like something crashes, something gets quote unquote lost, like, and just that idea of that being such a kind of sucker punch, like right in the gut for somebody who's like, wow, okay, well, because like, yeah, it should, like you said, like, the friction and stuff, like there should be none. Like it should just be smooth, and really just trying to be, really thoughtful to provide that kind of experience, because it's one of those things in so many parts of our life where like you shouldn't have to think about it, or you don't even notice it if it's working well, like they're not
Mhm.
being, oh my god, that was such
Mhm.
a great like payment system, like they're not maybe like thinking in that way.
Yeah,
It's like you didn't even
exactly.
have to think about it, it was that easy, like it just was like because I think, because I love like movies and TV,
That's
there's so
true.
many things with like when you're producing video, it's like it should be so good you don't even notice it, like it should just be so like seamless in terms of the editing and the music or whatever, like the sound editing, like. But yeah, so um they kind of segues, because they get like that idea of international student recruitment in particular, like that's something that's just a really
Mhm.
timely topic right now. There's been so many
Right.
disruptions, and obviously like you're kind of playing into the portion of they've committed to an institution and are making tuition and payments and those sort of things. So I guess like if you can give kind of like a super brief primer, as much as kind of your point of view
Mhm.
of like higher ed institutions are recruiting these international students, how has that worked traditionally? And I don't know, I guess like you can kind of just get ahead and sort of like how the status quo has started to change. We can kind of marry those two things
Mm.
together, like where were we and where are we now, like, and what's that kind of change been?
Where we are now. So as it relates to recruitment, well, number one, in general, so much change in higher ed that they're making decisions by the minute now, which is very different, right? As it relates to higher education, usually things are slower, a little more bureaucratic in nature, but it's for the first time I'm really seeing institutions figure out like, hey, what do we need to do different and be more student first in nature rather than this is how we do it. So I think that's the overarching thing that I'm seeing. And then as it relates to international student recruitment, uh, the traditional, I mean, this has been impacted massively. And so traditionally, universities, if I, so I have a global footprint. I have teams in all over the place. Outside of the US, the international student recruitment has really been super connected with the utilization of international education agencies. So they are organizations that market in country to international students and really do all that hand holding and help them identify where they might want to go and give that peace of mind to the parents to help them in that journey. And that really was a prominent way for, it still is, for students to be recruited in those countries. In the US, it's been it's been different in the sense that they haven't been a massive uh, stakeholder, and I see that changing. Right, so typically in the U.S. you have international recruitment teams. They'll go in markets. They'll go to a lot of those big student. They set up a table and lots of students come through and they do recruitment that way, and they might work with consultants in market, or they connect with these new organizations that establish foundation programs and things like that. But right now there's a lot of concern for leveraging those ways to recruit students. So what you see, and I've actually done a few webinars in this past, is that schools are figuring out, hey, what do we need to know about working with international education agencies, like how do we navigate that, and how can we help reach out to this third party to start to recruit students. So that's been I think one of the bigger changes. In fact, we've recently built some technology to help with that. So I think the big concern over the years with regards to agents, using agents in the US, is sort of been like, oh, agents, maybe they're not good, they take advantage of students, when in fact there's a lot of good ones
Mm.
out there, right? It's and but the big concern would be having the agents get in the money flow. So for us, we've been trying to provide some content around who they are, how do they help, and then also within our platform, because we're moving money, is how do we facilitate the movement of money from a student that's working with an agent, right? To make sure that everything is compliant and that sort of thing. So I feel like from what the conversations I'm in, a lot of the universities are trying to figure out how many things. Number one is, how do we continue to be able to recruit students? I think that's one. I think the other one is, how do we diversify our international student population? You see all the political challenges around China and what's going to happen with that population. It's a lot of universities and schools exposed, if something were to happen for their ability to travel here. So you see them wanting to now look at new markets like Vietnam and Africa and India and things like that, and try to increase and not be so dependent on one country. I see that happening a lot as well.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously like travel restrictions that are preventing people from doing those in-person events if they're doing them, in the
Yeah.
respective countries. And then, yeah, I mean, just like, I know generally like restrictions on, visas or different things. Like there's just, or I don't know, as much as like restrictions,
Oh
I
yeah.
think sometimes like just getting harder to get them or something, like it's just getting kind of bogged down. So
Mm.
yeah, it's interesting to see how, yeah, I'm sure that that's kind of a one thing is like, yeah, maybe we like try to diversify the countries because maybe it's like, well, we always get a lot of great students from a particular countries. They've like leaned into that a little bit more. And it's like, well,
Mm.
let's not put all our eggs in one basket kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I think the other thing too is that right now when you talk to the International Recruitment Office too, there's a map. I can share a link,
Mm-hmm.
after, like it's by state and what each university is planning to do for the fall. So that impacts it as well, right? So if a student is not able to travel here, and that's one of the reasons why we have a petition we can talk about later, if they can't get their visa interviews, they won't be able to travel. Then what is plan B? Or is there an in between plan? What if the the visa offices finally do open and then they can come? So these universities are not just planning for, like, are the international students coming or are they not? It's like, well, what if they can't come? Can we still facilitate that education that they started or want to start? And number two is, and then if that starts that way, what happens when they can travel? So it's like planning for like A, B, C, D. It's a
Mm-hmm.
ton of work, with things changing by the hour, by the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, I guess then kind of just I think you've mentioned a lot of this, but like, in terms of like the support that you're giving during this time to help with, that aspect of things is like, yeah, like trying to even like help uh, reassure an international student to even get to the point to be making, a tuition payment through your
Mm,
platform and, those sort of things. So I'm curious, like, with these type of like issues or thinking through all these kind of divergent kind of strains of like, well, if this, then that, and that sort of thing. Like, I don't know if you're kind of finding yourself in kind of a, thought partner role with institutional partners and those sort of things, like anything else, I guess, that you're trying to do. Because I think one thing, we'll give a moment to right after this, but like talking about that petition and stuff like that, like, like trying to do some advocacy and that sort of thing. So anything else that you're doing to,
mhm.
help with, your institution partners during this time.
Yeah. So we are doing, we're very plugged into the needs of our universities, our clients. We work with even K through 12, but we in higher education, we're investing a lot additional R&D, really, to our core payment platform, and we're really trying to figure out, like, what else do they need. One of the biggest, most recent requests has been, typically an international student will pay that big lump sum payment. And now, like, and I've never really seen this before, with the idea of offering international families payment plans, right? So that maybe they can start to, like, make a commitment, pay some money, and then break it into some installments so that by the time they come, they have it paid. Because we're talking about this pandemic not just affecting, like, whether they come or not. Because a lot of them have committed to saying we're okay with starting online. I know in China, a gap year is just unheard of, right? So it's like they'll do that, and so it's about, working with the universities to offer things like payment plans, supporting them with our around the clock customer support, also helping them address factors like the visa processing, and making the education more affordable with the payment plan functionality. So it's very difficult, obviously, for international students to get loans. So this is more around, like, offering them just another financial vehicle to maybe float their money a little bit, help the school start to see the cash flow and the commitment, and just helping them to deal with that new normal that they're dealing with right now. The on the petition side, so the other thing we're doing is that we've recently launched our Save Our Overseas Studies petition. And the reason we've done that is that in all the dialogue that myself and my team are having and what you see out there in the market, as it relates to COVID, we really just noticed a glaring omission from the conversation. It really is the international students. And we're trying to create the awareness of the huge cultural and not just cultural, academic, financial, impact they have to the universities. They bring over 41 billion to the U.S. economy and 450,000 U.S. jobs. And then many of the international graduate students, they focus on the medical research and they're dedicated to researching even COVID, for instance. So, we're just trying to bring as much awareness to their importance. And one of the things that's really kind of getting in the way right now is that the visa offices in countries remain closed. And so it just creates this, if those don't open, then the students obviously can't get their visas to be able to travel and study in the U.S. So this petition that we have it just explicitly asks for federal agencies to recognize. And we're not asking for a lot. We're just saying recognize the international students and create clear guidelines to get visas into their hands for the fall semester. And there's no communication on when or what anybody's thinking about. So we just thought that if we put together this petition and we got, with the help of some, our clients, just to kind of get that recognition, to make sure there's an awareness to the immense value that what they mean to the U.S., what they mean to jobs, and just get someone to look at it.
Yeah. Well, because it's just fascinating because like it seems as though we're struggling so much to even like figure out how campuses are going to operate for domestic on ground students and like, kind of doing maybe like some flexible like online and on ground and, that sort of thing. So then it's like, yeah, there's still all these international students who obviously like institutions love to have, and, they add so much to the university community and for research and like all those sort of things and doing jobs on campus and, providing like pipelines for really great talent for companies here in the US and stuff as well. So, there's just a laundry list of reasons why certainly this petition, which we'll link out to in the show notes, like why this is so important to make sure that there's some guidelines and sort of, advice as to, in anticipation of the fall, the soonest, of just like, how are we going to, manage this, or just provide some reassurances of this is being worked on and, that sort of thing. So
yeah, that's it. It's not even like, and we don't want, obviously no one wants anybody to travel or open the universities until it's safe. But I think it's just creating sort of like, hey, here's a group that we need to consider, because when you talk to the families in country, they just feel like there's not a lot of communication on even expectations, which in truth, it's still a game time decision for many universities anyway. So there is a lot of cloudiness around all of it. And to your point, when I talk to universities, the level of planning that has to happen to open, and all the ideas of smaller classes in big rooms and putting people in individual dormitories or creating little family units. Every piece of the campus has to sort of be thought about. So tremendous pressure on the organization itself. So for our part, it's just, there's a lot of things that universities have to consider, and we just wanted to try to figure out like a way to create some more awareness to the international student.
Yeah, and I love the clever acronym, the SOS petition there, because just like trying to get this on people's radar, and just, that's just like a kind of clever way to do it. But yeah, it's a really important topic. I think that this is something that maybe is just, this conversation, if it's happening in sort of the greater higher ed community, and sort of the zeitgeist, like seems to be kind of sequestered off somewhere. Like I feel somewhat plugged in, and I'm not seeing a lot of it. Because again, it's still people just kind of trying to figure out like, what does the fall term look like for your like, kind of traditional, and again, like you use air quotes here, like the traditional on ground college student and that sort of thing. But there's obviously so much more. And hopefully, getting this on people's radar and kind of thinking through, okay, can we try to like get some of this stuff figured out simultaneously versus like 100% of our focus is on this one certainly very important and large aspect of what the college experience is going to look like in the fall. But then it's like there's also a lot of other things I think is worthwhile to put some energy and effort into to just kind of sign on to things, like kind of add their voice to the collective voice to kind of really be trying to get some guidance and support or what like something like trying to just get things going in a better direction.
Yes, because we work, I mean, I think it's like everybody has their perspective too. And I think the place where we're focused education, all students, but the international student is, I think it's the impact to education itself. The reason why the international student population grew so quickly is not just because of diversity, but also they pay in full, right? There's really no discounting for them. There's no financial aid really. So these universities have been really built on that revenue stream as well. So there's a potential devastating impact to higher ed in general if we don't keep some focus to this, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So then kind of just as we were starting to kind of wind down, like, with all that we've covered and just kind of, highlighted what's going on right now, what advice would you give kind of to your typical higher ed professional during this moment of just anything that can help make sure that they're keeping well informed or kind of doing the right thing to do right by their international students? So any advice that you would give?
It's interesting. We're going to plan we are going to be running a webinar with the PDG group, Professional Development Group in Higher Ed, and it's really around the impact of COVID. And for the first time, we've got the International Student Office arm and the business office, the financial office together. And what I've noticed over the years is they've kind of operated very separately. And it just kind of occurred to me in these discussions when the bursars or financial services people are saying, wow, that's really good to know. Like, I didn't realize that. So even as we start to progress forward, there'll be nuances to different countries around the world on what their restrictions are, or can someone actually physically get to a bank? Someone mentioned there was a student who went back to China that had to spend 14 days in a hotel before they could get back out into and back into just getting home. And so this person was very concerned because they couldn't pay, right? They had something due. So she got involved and called the business office. But it's just it's an example of sort of the impact of what's happening globally. This pandemic is not just here in the US, it's everywhere. It's kind of mind-blowing to think, like, I'm on the phone every day with someone from China or Singapore, or Spain, and we're all in our homes. Like, we're all in the same boat. And so and then we'll all emerge out of this at different phases. So I think my advice, particularly to the student finance office, and that's really where we spend a lot of time, is, get connected with your international student office, understand sort of what's happening in the different parts of the world. And I think you have to be extremely flexible and open-minded and offer, the flexibility around payments and things like that, because it's just a very different time now.
Yeah. And I think I keep saying this when we talk about stuff like this. It's just like, giving, your colleagues and, incoming students and that sort of thing, just like give them some grace, be patient, like be supportive, empathetic, and that sort of thing. Like, I think we all need a little bit of that right now. Just as we're trying to juggle a lot of just emotions and more obligations than we anticipated and those sort of things. So, so
true.
And I guess I'm curious, anything that you'd want to recommend, certainly it could be resources from your team or just anything else in terms of like stuff that's been relevant or maybe just good escapes, stuff that you're reading, watching, listening to that you'd want to recommend that we could include in the show notes.
Oh, interesting. Well, I think if it's personal, I was thinking about how different my life has become. I think we're all like that. And I've been really consumed with work. I think we all have. Don't you feel like you work more now than you ever did because it's sort of around the clock at home?
Yeah. I mean, I work remotely anyway, so it's like there's always that temptation, or always just like, oh, let me peek in really quick or whatever. And it's like now everybody's doing that, so yeah, it's kind of like that much easier because like, oh, I got another email. Here we go. Yeah.
I love, so I have two teenage boys, and and I've also been a global traveler. But what I'm trying so hard to do, and I really feel like the last 10 years growing a business, it seems like my mind is always somewhere, right? And I'm trying so hard to be present right now. I'm taking, like, when I take breaks, I'll take hikes. We have a new puppy. When I'm with my kids, it's like being in the moment, like stay out of the past and stay out of the future. And so I've actually been, it's not reading it, I'm doing Audible, but I've been listening to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's sort of like, it's taken me a little bit to, it's definitely not an easy concept, but sort of like working on really hard to be present. And I know you have a new child too, and I just feel like there's so many times that we're plugged into 1,000 different things, or we're worrying about so many other things, that it's we miss some moments now. And so I'm really working hard on that for myself. So if anybody's interested in kind of working on that, as far as music goes, typically I don't like my teenagers' music, but I'm loving this new Harry Styles album. The what is it? The Fine Line album, and it's really great. And then there's another artist, Louis Capaldi. Um, he's really great too. So I find myself trying really hard to, like, take a break from work, try to be as present as I can in my life outside of this, running this business, and listening to good music. I mean, it's just, it sounds like easy, but sometimes it's not that easy, right?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, yeah, like as much as I listen to podcasts, I'm also a recent convert to audiobooks because, yeah, like I'm taking my dog out or like, just gonna be bopping around. I can just like throw it on, listen to a couple chapters and all that because I'm usually awful about reading books. Like just being able to like sit down and kind of in that sense of like be present, just be like, I am here with this book right now. I'm like, my brain is like going warp speed and I'm like, I can't just like sit and read, but like, bite-sized chunks of an audiobook is like perfect. So
Yes, exactly. I can even go to sleep with it. So I do like podcasts as well, and there's no question about that. I like that How I
mhm.
Built This. That's I think an NPR program that was pretty neat. So and then if there's anything as it relates to education, I think Inside Higher Ed is a great. I like look at that, the Pi News. I know the woman that started that a long time ago in the UK, kind of started a business the same. They're plugged into those international, stories and things that's happening there. And then NASA, National Association for Foreign Student, I don't think they're like a huge international organization, and that's all they focus on everything, all of the issues. So those are the big things that are important to be plugged in as it relates to international students. And our petition, if we could get some support on that, that would be
Yeah.
great.
Because yeah, I think it's like as much as the news is overwhelming right now, it's like keep your eye on it. Like just be kind of aware of what's going on. You do not be to like be awash and sort of like drowning yourself in the fire hose of the news, but certainly like try to have that good balance of like, keeping aware of what's going on, but also like, yeah, be present, take time, to be with your
Yeah.
family or just like, relax and that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of
Don't watch the news, maybe.
yeah.
Don't watch the news so much.
Yeah, I think yeah, like inside higher ed, those it's just like skim, see what kind of is like the headlines, maybe read a couple of things really quick because like usually their stuff's not terribly long or like yeah, I know for me like
No, it's simple.
listening to the daily when like or just like a 20-minute podcast of just like something that's going on right now,
Yeah.
like that's usually enough. But yeah, so and I think too, like it kind of I like our always ending on our final question here, like optimistically looking towards the future. Absolutely, one of the things like making sure signing the petition to make sure that we're getting towards kind of the future state in the fall and beyond to make sure that all these incoming international students are having the best experience possible. So we'll give another. Tip of the hat to it as we're closing out here. But anything else, just sort of like, maybe looking for the silver linings or just sort of like what you're hoping for, that comes out of this unique experience that we're all going through, the entirety of the world. What are you looking forward to, in your job, in life, or in the world? So any or all of those categories, just kind of ending everything on an optimistic note.
So I love Flywire. We call ourselves Flymates. I don't know if I mentioned that. And I'm looking forward to being able to see them in person, and because they're friends and they feel like family to me as well. So I can't wait to the day where we can just kind of come together. I have teams globally. It'll be nice to travel at some point. I think but for the now, I have a vacation at the end of the month. I'm going to Martha's Vineyard. It's off the coast of Cape Cod, and I do this every year. And I'm so happy that I don't have to change it. It'll be very different. Obviously, there's not going to be a lot open there, but it's kind of getting away with the family, playing yard games, keeping it simple. And I think it just kind of trying to find joy in some of those things with all of this other, with the things that are happening in this world. I think it's sometimes good to just kind of stay back and get back to basics. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. Because yeah, it's like I would still advocate, even though I think it feels like, since we're all at home most of the time, it's like, why would I take a vacation? I'm just here because, I think the perception is like you're going somewhere, but it's like, yeah, but like give yourself permission to like literally do not touch work for like a week or something, even if you're like not going anywhere, which I presume a lot of people wouldn't if they took time off. You are starting to be a little bit more able to, even though, like you said, it's like, you're not maybe going to have the experience that you've had in the past, but it's like, yeah, you could still just be lazy, and that's great. That's great. That's like a good use of the time to just sort of like, I don't have to wake up at any time, like, and again, that's presuming maybe if you don't have like, again, like me, like an infant or something like that, but it's also just like, okay, take care of the baby. Then it's just like, okay, what do I want to do for the rest of my day? Like I don't have to like, like rush to get the baby all settled. And I got to go into work and I got to, be in meetings all day. And then I got to make dinner. And, it's just like, you kind of take one huge chunk of the equation out. And I know it's been helpful for me to just sort of, take the time as I can to, slow down a bit and be a little bit lazier. So,
no question. Yeah. I think one of the things too is that you just mentioned it, and we've actually have given everybody a digital disconnect day at Flywire. It's like, just, you have to take a day, like we're giving it to them, and you just have to tell us like, what did you do? And it can't have anything to do with work or being on any device of any sort.
yeah, that'd be the idea of like, I read a book, or yeah, like, if you go up to Martha's Vineyard, it's like, I just like hung out on my patio and like, watched the clouds go by, had a nice drink or something, like just, and that's like, awesome. Perfect. That's such a good use of the time.
I had a cone of ice cream while sitting on the beach. There we go.
Great. Well, yeah, good. I mean, so, we'll have ways to connect with the petition, you and the work that Flywire is doing in the show notes and all the other stuff that we mentioned. But thank you so much, Sharon, for taking some time to hang out for the podcast here. There's a lot of great stuff, good things for folks to be thinking about, and a good way for folks to take action with the petition to try to help move things forward in a positive direction. So just thank you so much for your time and all that you shared.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.